What if I told you a group of underpaid, overworked women, and even children, defied some of the most powerful corporations in America and won? In freezing conditions, they took to the streets for not just better wages, but for dignity, for humanity, for a future. They were fighting for more than bread to eat. They wanted roses too. What does that even mean? And how did their fight change the course of history forever? Let's dive into the story of the Bread and Roses strike, one of the most explosive yet inspiring uprisings you've probably never heard of. To understand this incredible moment, we need to go back to Lawrence, Massachusetts, in 1912. At the time, the city was a powerhouse of America's booming textile industry. Massive mills operated around the clock, churning out fabric for a growing nation. But behind the scenes, things weren't so glamorous. The workers, many of them immigrants from countries like Italy, Poland, and Ireland, faced brutal conditions. Most toiled 12 to 14 hours a day in freezing cold or sweltering heat, inhaling cotton fibers that wreaked havoc on their lungs, and all for pay that barely put food on the table. Here's where it gets even worse. In January 1912, a new Massachusetts law reduced the maximum work week for women and children from 56 to 54 hours. Sounds like a win, right? Well, not exactly. Instead of keeping wages the same, mill owners slashed their pay to match the shorter hours. For these workers, losing a few cents a week was catastrophic. They were already surviving on razor-thin margins. The final straw came on January 11, 1912. When Polish women working at the Everett Mill opened their pay envelopes and saw they'd been shorted, they had enough. They stormed out of the factory, shouting, "Short pay, all out." Within days, thousands of workers from all backgrounds joined them, shutting down the mills and bringing the city to a standstill. The Bread and Roses strike had begun. Now, let's talk about that name, Bread and Roses. It comes from a poem by James Oppenheim that symbolized what these workers were fighting for. Bread represented fair wages and basic survival, while roses stood for dignity, respect, and a better quality of life. It wasn't just about money, it was about being treated as human beings. This strike was different from most at the time. For one, it was led largely by women, many of whom didn't even speak the same language. Over 30 different nationalities were represented among the workers, yet they managed to organize and communicate, often using interpreters and even pantomime to coordinate their efforts. They held massive marches, carried banners in multiple languages, and sang songs of solidarity. The women at the forefront were fearless, even in the face of incredible dangers. And there were dangers. The mill owners didn't take this lying down. They hired private detectives and called in the National Guard to intimidate the strikers. Police often attacked peaceful protests with batons and fire hoses. In one tragic incident, a young woman named Anna Lopizzo was killed during a clash with police. Despite the violence, the workers refused to back down. One of the most powerful moments of the strike came when organizers sent hundreds of children, yes, children, to stay with supportive families in other cities like New York and Philadelphia. The idea was to protect them from the harsh conditions in Lawrence and to draw national attention to the strike. It worked. When people saw these malnourished, poorly clothed kids stepping off the trains, the public was outraged. Suddenly, the whole country was watching Lawrence. The mill owners were backed into a corner. With the national press covering every move and public opinion turning against them, they had no choice but to negotiate. After 10 weeks of protests, the workers won. They secured a 15% pay raise, overtime pay, and promises of no retaliation for striking. It was a historic victory, not just for the workers of Lawrence, but for labor movements across the country. But the legacy of the Bread and Roses strike goes beyond just wages and hours. It showed the power of unity, especially among marginalized groups. It proved that even the most vulnerable could stand up to the powerful and win. And it reminded everyone that the fight for justice isn't just about survival, it's about demanding a life worth living. So the next time you hear someone talk about the labor movement, remember the workers of Lawrence, Massachusetts. Remember the women, the immigrants, the children who risked everything, not just for bread, but for roses too. If you found this story as inspiring as we did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from history. Let us know in the comments what you think about the Bread and Roses strike, and we'll see you in the next video.